Hi everyone, I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. Our focus continues to be on the unraveling situation in Afghanistan, where the Taliban, after making the right noises, seems to be slipping back into its old terrifying ways. A Tolo News journalist has been assaulted, but unlike earlier reports, has thankfully survived the attack. In moments from now, we'll be talking to the owner of Tolo News, Saad Mohseni. But let's bring up our big story and our big focus on Afghanistan today. As we said, there were initially terrifying reports that a journalist had been killed in an attack by the Taliban. Mercifully, he has survived the attack, and a dialogue will be opened with the Taliban as to why he and his camera person were under attack to begin with. The Taliban, in the meantime, is asking working women to stay at home for now, arguing that their fighters have not yet been fully trained as to how they should respond to women when they're out in the public domain. Biden continues to double down on his catastrophic, bumbling pullout from Afghanistan, unmindful of the world's criticism and the consequences for the region. There are also reports of a terror threat at the Kabul airport. Amid all of this, India has convened an all-party meeting on the situation arising from the return of the Taliban. That continues to be our big focus on our broadcast today as we ask the question that perhaps we don't yet know the answer to. Is the Taliban 2.0 no different from the earlier avatar of the Taliban? What does it mean in particular for women, for children, for the media, especially the Afghan media, courageously reporting in the shadow, literally, of the gun? And what sort of government might we be looking at in Afghanistan? A Taliban dominated one or a more representative one? To talk about this and a lot more, we're joined by Saad Mohseni, an old friend, as well as the promoter of Tolo News, whose journalists have courageously continued to report through this crisis. Saad, welcome. And I think we've always spoken about what a dangerous job it is for Afghan journalists on the ground. Today, one of your colleagues, one of your reporters came under attack. There was a lot of fear in the beginning that he may have been killed, but fortunately he has survived. Can you tell us first a little bit about what happened and why he was attacked at all? Why was he targeted?
Good afternoon, Barkha. Thanks again for having me on your show. Actually, the mistake was from Google Translate. It translated this journalist having gotten beaten to having been killed. Anyway, that's been clarified. The journalist was out yesterday in the Charai Oji, which is a square where a lot of people, laborers, look for job, and you always get a good indication in terms of what the job market's like. So I think the reporter was out there trying to interview people, laborers, as to whether they were getting jobs or not, what the pay was like. And I think a vehicle showed up, 4 or 5 Taliban came out of a white Land Cruiser and started to beat these 2 gentlemen up, the camera person as well as the journalists, confiscated their camera, their microphone, and their mobile phone. We then reported the incident to the Cultural Commission, the Taliban Cultural Commission, who then assured us that they would investigate this immediately, and they, I think, subsequently have had other meetings to ensure that these individuals are apprehended and the cameras returned to our news team.
Mm-hmm. I've been following, what you've been saying on Twitter very closely. You spoke about how the Taliban came to the headquarters of Tolo News in Kabul, how you're a little surprised that you're still on air, and how women in your station have continued to report and be on television. The latest statement from the Taliban on the rights of women to work is somewhat confusing. It sounds contradictory. One of their spokespersons says if women wear the hijab, they can work. Another says that working women should stay at home because as of now, their own men are not trained to respect them. Are your female colleagues still on air? What is the decision you've taken as a promoter?
They are on air. Well, technically they are, but the problem also for us is we have 2 challenges. One is that many of our staff members have opted to leave the country or are in the process of leaving the country, which means that we're running out of journalists in Kabul. So we've had to hire people very quickly. We've just hired 2 female journalists who'll probably be on air soon, like in the next few days. Yes, they're coming to work. We are concerned because, that these vehicles usually get stopped, and it may be difficult to explain to the checkpoint person, the Taliban security person, that she doesn't work for the government, because this ban is, it only relates to female employees of the government, and it's apparently a temporary ban. So that's the conundrum for us: is that how do we deal with the Taliban militias on the streets of Kabul? And of course, there are different groups representing different regions who are in Kabul who are not experts in policing. So navigating your way through Kabul can be very challenging. And these are challenges that we face daily in terms of how do we navigate this new terrain.
Mm-hmm. The last time we were speaking, you were extremely angry, disappointed, disillusioned, like so many Afghans I've spoken to, with Biden, who has since doubled down. The chaotic scenes that we've seen at the Kabul airport, there are also some reports suggesting that if the Taliban, has obstructed passage to the airport, then a lot of the chaos and the tragic scenes we see at the airport are also because of Western forces. What is your own reading? The despair that we see at the airport in Kabul, who is to blame for that?
Well, there's plenty of blame to go around. I think obviously it's very badly managed. The simple question is, why would you want to take your military out before you take out your civilians? That no one's answered that question. It's been very badly managed, very badly executed by the Americans. But I think you have to really the blame really has to the person who's got to take the most responsibility is Ashraf Ghani. That by fleeing the country like he did with his closest aides, he basically triggered this collapse in the system. The minute it was announced that he was gone, the police officers took off their uniforms, immigration officers went home, ministers fled, and it was complete anarchy. And then that's when the airport thousands of people went to the airport to flee the country. This could have been better managed. This was totally avoidable. So I think first and foremost, it's Ashraf Ghani. This is on him. And of course, Biden's going to take his share of the blame. The Taliban are probably the least responsible, because they've been asked by the Americans to ensure that thousands and tens of thousands of people don't enter the airport or the compound. And they're trying their best to keep people out. Obviously, they're using sticks and they're shooting in the air, and the weather's not good and everyone's very tense. But really, there are others to blame.
What is your early reading of how the Taliban have behaved thus far? Like I said, there's this diktat on women, and you rightly point out it's women working in government offices, and on the government television station, a man very swiftly replaced the woman presenter. But there's also now talk of restrictions on music in public. These are shades of the Taliban the world has seen and known and experienced before. Do you think that there is such a thing as the Taliban 2.0, or do you think that is propaganda or a media narrative that is simply not true?
Probably it's somewhere in between. I think it's very difficult to have this sort of black and white view of the Taliban. There's little doubt that they have changed, only because a lot of them have been exposed to new things. They've lived in Doha, they've lived in Islamabad, they've traveled, they've seen things for themselves. So I think that the leadership would perhaps have a different mindset in terms of the way they would want to govern. At the same time, their constituency remains very, very, very ideological and very hardcore. So they have to, even if they've changed, they probably have to navigate, the two demands, the international demands in terms of women's rights and a more moderate version of what they've practiced in the past, and the demands of their constituencies, which is still very conservative. So, if people are willing to send their kids to die for the cause, it's not just about power. It's also about ideology and what they believe is their version of Islam. And we have to wait as to see who's going to prevail within the Taliban. They have different factions and they have different identities. And right now there is this sort of tug of war within the Taliban in terms of key positions. And the fact that we haven't had an announcement is an indication that perhaps these discussions that haven't been resolved. And then of course the next question is, after they figure things out on the in terms of key Taliban members or factions, is that how broad-based will their government be? Will they include the likes of Hamid Karzai and Abdullah and others, or will they attempt to govern exclusively? And then once they're in government, then we will see what sort of laws they have. Will they have directives on how women should dress and how media should conduct itself? So we're a long way off from assuming anything. I think we just have to wait and see. There's no doubt that the environment is going to be more restrictive. The question is how restrictive.
I'm really struck by what you said, that you're running short of journalists. That is a pretty staggering statement to make. How many of your journalists have decided to leave the country for personal safety or in panic, like so many other Afghans have?
I think it's a combination of all. Like people are panicked. People don't have much faith in terms of the Taliban delivering in terms of jobs and economic growth and so forth. And thirdly, there's an opportunity. I think that even Afghanistan was completely at peace and there was no conflict, presented with an opportunity to resettle in the US or Europe or Australia or even South America, they would take their chances. By the way, if they offered 20,000 seats on various planes flying to Europe and North America in Delhi, I'm sure that hundreds of thousands of people will show up, even in a place like India. So it's a combination of the three, and we've lost about 70 people so far, 70 of our top people. It's painful because you build capacity. It takes a long time. You can't begrudge them for attempting to leave simply because we cannot, with any certainty, predict the future.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But in the meantime, do you think that there is any merit to the fight? And when I say merit, I mean practical merit to the fight that's being put up in the Panjshir Valley by Amrullah Saleh and his compatriots, Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, taking us back to the years of the Northern Alliance that Indians remember well. Amrullah Saleh is declaring himself constitutionally as the person to step in now that Ashraf Ghani has fled. How are Afghans viewing his role? Or does everybody basically think that it's only a matter of time before they either give up or join the negotiating table?
I think, there's this wait and see attitude from most Afghans, people both in terms of the general public as well as the political establishment. I think that a lot of people who did side with the Taliban, or at least didn't fight, for them it's like, we don't like this government. Ashraf Ghani wasn't particularly popular towards the end. No one was willing to die for Ashraf Ghani or his government. And a lot of these people are just waiting and, they have this wait and see approach or attitude. We'll see. I think with the Panjshir resistance, there's a lot of talking. I know there was a delegation that was in Parwan yesterday, was there to meet with the Taliban delegation. I think there's an interest from both sides to resolve this peacefully if possible. But let's wait and see. They have a pretty strong military force of like 4,000 or 5,000. Is it enough to defend the valley indefinitely? We don't know. I mean, they probably have to capture a lot more territory. But I would say, if I was a betting man, I would say that there's probably more. There's more likelihood of a deal of sorts than actual fighting.
What gives you hope, if anything, since the Taliban took control of Kabul, and what gives you despair at this point? Is there any reason to be optimistic?
Well, I don't know if I could call it being optimistic, but I think the things that we can do, and we're not just observers, obviously, and we were involved in discussing this issue and pushing the different sides, and whether we're talking about local Afghan politicians or people outside, is if there's an opportunity to work with the moderate Taliban, it's now. This is the time to engage them.
Is there a moderate Taliban? Does it exist?
I think there are some pragmatic, I wouldn't call them moderate, but they're pragmatic Taliban who obviously understand that for them to survive in 2021 in Afghanistan in terms of all the challenges that Afghanistan is facing, which is economic, humanitarian, and political, that a more engaged Afghanistan is a must. And those pragmatic Taliban obviously can perhaps work with the world and work within Afghanistan to present something that's very different to the Taliban we saw in the mid 1990s. So engaging them maybe, and this will be the last shot. If we miss this window, I don't think we can return to this opportunity. So I think we'll know in the next few weeks as to whether that's possible, whether they're going to be more pragmatic, whether they're going to have a broad-based government, whether they're going to be inclusive in terms of women and minorities, whether they're going to allow people to go back and forth. I mean, they're not going to have travel restrictions and so forth. So the next few weeks will be key. And because Afghanistan is a very different country to 2001. I mean, the population has gone from 21 million to like almost 38 million people now. That's a huge jump. And even if you look at the city of Kabul, we had 1 million inhabitants in 2001. Now we have close to 7 million people. Greater Kabul has 7 million people. How do you manage a country like this? Its demands are significantly more than it was in 2001. So for the Taliban not to realize that is a big mistake, and they will pay a price for this unless they moderate their ways.
Yeah, the Taliban has been variously described as a colony of Pakistan. This takeover has been called an invasion by Pakistan with an Afghan face. How do you see the role of Pakistan? In their press conference, the Taliban described Pakistan to be their second home, while saying we want good relations with India. From the perspective in Delhi, this is a very complicated set of options before us because we have taken our diplomats out. We did not believe them to be secure and safe. There's an all-party meeting on. We are offering emergency visas to the Afghan people. Let me ask you first about Pakistan and its role, and then about what you think India might be able to do. So let's start with Pakistan. Do you see the Taliban as a kind of colony or a vassal army of Pakistan?
Yes and no. I think that there are certain groups who have very close ties to the Pakistanis, like the Haqqani network. I think all of them rely on Pakistan in terms of sanctuaries, hospitals, aid, assistance, for the logistical needs, strategy and planning. But that was also the case in the 1980s with the Mujahideen that people like my family supported. But as soon as they came to Kabul, things changed very dramatically. I know that there is tension between some groups and Pakistan. I mean, Mullah Baradar was in a Pakistani prison. I believe he broke his back because he was tortured and pushed off a second-story floor. When Afghans get to Kabul, they have their viewpoint changes dramatically, and I think that watch this space. I think that a Taliban, in particular, if it's led by the Kandahari faction, the Mullah Baradar's faction, is going to be far more independent than a lot of people assume. But also, they're going to be responsible for a country of 35, 36, or 37 million people, and you can't rely on Pakistan, which has its own issues, and they have to be a lot more engaged. And I think even for India, there's an opportunity to engage even now, because Afghanistan cannot survive with just Pakistani support. And surely they'll upset the Pakistanis, because Afghans are, at the end of the day, very, very independent, and they've just beaten a superpower. They're not going to allow the Pakistanis to bully them. I think that even the last few months, the leverage that Pakistan had previously has gone down significantly. So I think that there is, there's this assumption that they're tied in with Pakistan forever is probably not true.
How do you see how India has responded thus far? First, starting with, there's a debate in India over whether Indian diplomats should have been pulled out. Of course, we understand the security concerns and the need to keep lives safe. But there is a push from certain quarters that believes that the embassy should have been kept functional. And secondly, this sort of opening of emergency visas. is all right now that India can and is doing, at least overtly. How do you see the Indian response thus far?
Well, you can't blame the government for pulling its diplomats out. And, there are all sorts of rumors, militias who may not be Afghans, who may be Pakistanis roaming the streets of Kabul. You just don't know. I mean, do you want to risk your diplomats' lives for a little bit of goodwill? I think India can return with its reputation intact. India's let's call it approval rating is very high in Afghanistan. Afghans love Indian music, movies, health facilities. It's a great destination for Afghan tourists. That's not going to go away, and I think that that's a given. So I think India can return in due course when it feels that its diplomats will be safe. I think the issue I have with India is that they invested too heavily in individuals. They invested heavily in Ashraf Ghani and his team, and I think that was a mistake. They should have engaged all the stakeholders, but in particular, they should have engaged more with the Afghan people and the institutions. But it's not too late. I think India can continue to play a very proactive, positive role, dealing with either the Taliban or other individuals within, hopefully, the new government. India's too close, too important to Afghanistan to completely disengage itself.
I want to end by talking about the Americans. As I said, the last time we spoke was just before the Taliban kind of officially took over, and you were mad at Biden, as literally everybody I know is. I was talking to Lisa Curtis, who advised the Trump administration, and she said that it was a moral, military, and a strategic failure the way the withdrawal has been handled. Now we see the CIA director himself sitting down with the Taliban. What do you think is going to happen in terms of the American response going forward and the world order as we understand it changing? Because a lot of countries in our region are now looking at the United States as an undependable ally.
Listen, America has no more role to play in South Central Asia. I think that's it for America, at least for a couple of decades. It has no credibility. No one trusts them anymore. Biden, I mean, I just, not his last speech, but the one before that, he mumbled through his speech, blamed everyone but himself. Didn't address the most important issue, which is the execution of the withdrawal. Badly managed, badly executed. He said, in an interview, he said, touch wood, no one died. I mean, he's oblivious.
I saw that. And he actually touched the wood on the table. It wasn't even like a colloquialism.
No. And oblivious to the fact that dozens, at least a dozen people have died from the information I have. 7 people fell off the plane and others have been shot, were shot on the first and second day of the Taliban takeover. So, the buck stops with him. It actually does. And although Trump made the decision, Lisa's boss made the decision to get out and sign that ridiculous deal with the Taliban in February of last year, really, Biden is the one that made the final decision. It was irresponsible. It was not courageous. It let down a partner, and the consequences we'll see in the years ahead. Because what happens in Afghanistan doesn't necessarily stay in Afghanistan.
Exactly. Well said. What keeps you up at night, Saad? What is your biggest fear for your country and for your people?
Well, we worry about our staff. I mean, it's a very personal, it's something very close. So we worry about them. We worry about our business, this institution that we've created. And it's prospered over 2 decades. It's helped facilitate social change. And it's Afghanistan is the freest market in the region by far. And I worry about my people. The Afghan people don't deserve this because of 2 bad presidents. Biden and Ashraf Ghani, we're paying a very heavy price.
And more courage and more power to the elbow of every single journalist at Tolo News. Saad Mohseni, the owner, promoter, media entrepreneur of Tolo News, among other media ventures. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll keep a close eye and hope to have you back very soon. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Barkha. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalist.